There are doors in this world that most of us will never walk through, rooms we'll never see, and ceremonies we were never supposed to know about. Behind the walls of ancient fortresses, inside windowless buildings on ivy-covered campuses, and deep within forests guarded by armed men, secret societies have been conducting rituals that would make your skin crawl for centuries. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on some of the most disturbing, verified, and genuinely unsettling rituals ever practiced by the world's most powerful and secretive organizations. On the night of May 1st, 1776, 5 men gathered in a forest outside the Bavarian city of Ingolstadt, Germany. The trees around them were dense, the air was cool, and the only light came from the torches they carried. This wasn't a casual meeting among friends. These men, led by a 30-year-old professor of canon law named Johann Adam Weishaupt, were about to lay the foundation for what would become the most talked about secret society in human history, the Order of the Illuminati. Weishaupt was a complicated man. Orphaned at 5, he had been raised by his godfather, a member of the Bavarian Privy Council, and educated by the Jesuits, the very religious order he would come to despise. By the time he became a professor at the University of Ingolstadt, he had grown deeply disillusioned with the grip that organized religion and monarchy held over European thought. He consumed the works of the French Enlightenment philosophers in his uncle's library and became convinced that society needed to be fundamentally restructured, that reason should replace superstition, and that a small, enlightened elite could guide humanity towards something better. But Weishaupt didn't want to just write about these ideas. He wanted to build something, an engine of change, and he wanted it cloaked in total secrecy. So on that May night, he and 4 of his law students, Franz Anton von Massenhausen, Max Edler von Merz, Andreas Suter, and a man known only as Bauhoff, formed a brotherhood they initially called the Perfectibilists. Each man took a secret name drawn from classical antiquity. Weishaupt became Spartacus. His students became Ajax, Tiberius, Erasmus, Rhodomodamus, and Agathon. Even the cities where they operated were given code names, and all correspondence between members was written in cipher. From the beginning, the Illuminati were built on layers of ritual and control. The society was divided into 3 main classes: the nursery, which included the lowest ranks of novices and minervals, a Masonic class with its own borrowed ceremonies, and the highest tier, the mystery class, which contained the grades of priest, regent, magus, and king. Each level came with its own initiation, its own set of obligations, and its own deeper layer of supposed truth that the member was being granted access to. The idea was that with each degree you advanced through, you peeled back another veil, getting closer to the ultimate knowledge that only the inner circle possessed. The initiation rituals borrowed heavily from Freemasonry, which Weishaupt had joined in 1777 at a Munich lodge called Theodor zum Guten Rath. He studied the Masonic structure and essentially hijacked it for his own purposes, using Masonic lodges as recruiting grounds. His chief collaborator in this was Baron Adolf von Knigge, an experienced Freemason who brought organizational genius and a flair for ritual design to the order. Knigge fleshed out the Gradle structure that Weishaupt had only sketched and created elaborate ceremonies for each degree, complete with costumes, oaths, and symbolic objects. But beneath the philosophical veneer lay something more unsettling. The Illuminati operated as what Weishaupt himself described as an elaborate network of spies and counter-spies. Every member was required to report on those below him, creating a web of surveillance within the order itself. Members were expected to submit detailed personal information, confessional-style autobiographies, and regular reports on their activities and the activities of others. Trust no one. Watch everyone. Report everything. The paranoia was baked into the system. When the Bavarian government finally caught wind of the Illuminati's activities, the crackdown was swift and merciless. In 1786, police raided the home of Xavier von Zwack, one of Weishaupt's highest-ranking members, and seized a treasure trove of secret documents, including the order's cipher, its internal calendar, code names for geographical locations, and lists of members dating back to the Society's founding. The contents of those documents horrified the Bavarian authorities. The Illuminati were officially banned, members were interrogated and persecuted, and Weishaupt himself was forced to flee Bavaria, eventually finding refuge with the Duke of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg, where he lived out the rest of his life in relative obscurity, writing defensive treatises about his creation until his death in 1830. What made the Illuminati's internal system particularly chilling was the degree of psychological control embedded within it. Members at the lower levels had no idea who controlled the levels above them. Weishaupt deliberately structured the organization so that no single member, apart from himself, could see the complete picture. Information flowed upward, commands flowed downward, and the people carrying out those commands often had no understanding of why they were doing what they were doing, or who had ordered it. Each initiate believed that he was being watched, tested, and evaluated at all times, and the fear of being exposed or expelled kept members in line far more effectively than any physical threat could have. The ceremonial elements reinforced this atmosphere of paranoid devotion. Initiation into each grade involved solemn oaths of secrecy, the symbolic exchange of tokens and passwords, and the dramatic revelation of new knowledge that the initiate had supposedly earned through his obedience and loyalty. Weishaupt understood that the human need to feel special, to be among the chosen, was a more powerful motivator than money or threats. By making each member feel that he was part of something vast and important, something that most of humanity was too blind or too weak to understand, Weishaupt created a self-reinforcing cycle of devotion that would have been the envy of any cult leader. The Illuminati, as Weishaupt conceived them, lasted barely 11 years, but the shadow they cast has never fully receded. The idea that a small group of enlightened insiders could secretly manipulate the levers of power proved too seductive to die with the order itself. And to this day, the name Illuminati conjures images of shadowy figures pulling strings from behind the curtain. But the real Illuminati weren't supernatural puppeteers. They were idealists with a taste for secrecy and control. Men who believed they knew better than everyone else and built a system designed to ensure that no one could ever question them. And in many ways, that's far more disturbing than any conspiracy theory. Now, if the Illuminati were products of the Enlightenment, a rationalist rebellion against church and crown, then the order that preceded them by centuries was something far more primal. The Knights Templar were born not in university lecture halls, but on the blood-soaked roads of the Holy Land, and their rituals, both real and alleged, would haunt Europe for generations. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, as they were formerly known, were founded around 1119 in Jerusalem in the aftermath of the First Crusade. Their original purpose was simple and noble: to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. Recognized and blessed by the Pope, they took monastic vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but unlike traditional monks, they also carried swords. They lived like ascetics and fought like medieval special forces. And over the course of nearly 2 centuries, they grew into one of the most powerful organizations in Christendom, with vast land holdings, a sophisticated banking system, and a military reputation that struck fear into their enemies. But with power came suspicion, and the secrecy surrounding their internal rituals only deepened the mistrust. New members joined the order through reception ceremonies held behind closed doors, usually with only other Templars present. During these receptions, a new brother would sign over all his worldly possessions to the order and take his vows. The ceremonies themselves were heavily guarded secrets, and this secrecy, combined with the Templars' immense wealth and political influence, made them a target. The blow came on Friday, October 13th, 1307, a date that some historians believe gave rise to the enduring superstition about that particular combination of day and number. On that morning, agents of King Philip IV of France executed coordinated raids across the country, arresting every Templar they could find, including the Grand Master, Jacques de Molay. The charges were staggering: heresy, idolatry, sodomy, denial of Christ, and the worship of a mysterious bearded head called Baphomet. Philip's chancellor, Guillaume de Nogaret, had devised the scheme to topple the Templars, and the accusations read like a medieval horror script. According to the formal charges, which would eventually be expanded to 127 separate articles, new Templars were required during their initiation to deny Christ 3 times, to spit upon, trample, or even urinate on a crucifix as a supposed test of obedience. They were accused of placing obscene kisses on the lower spine, the navel, and the mouth of their initiators. The charges claimed that Templars were obligated to engage in carnal relations with other members of the order, if requested to do so. And perhaps most disturbing of all, they were said to worship idols during secret rituals, including a bearded head, variously described as having 1 face or 3, and sometimes depicted as a cat. The primary tool used to substantiate these charges was torture. Inquisitors employed the rack, forced immersion in water, starvation, sleep deprivation, and burning. The feet of some Templars were greased with fat and held over open flames until the bones fell away. Under such conditions, the confessions poured in. Of the roughly 140 Templars detained during the initial round of arrests in Paris, 138 confessed to at least some of the charges. Many admitted to denying Christ, spitting on the cross, and venerating the mysterious head. But here's where the story takes its most chilling turn. When the torture stopped, many Templars immediately recanted their confessions. Jacques de Molay himself, after initially confessing, later stood before papal investigators and declared his innocence and the innocence of his order. In response, the French authorities made a brutal public example. On May 12, 1310, 54 Templars who had revoked their confessions were brought in chains before crowds of Parisians at the fields outside Saint Antoine Monastery. Each was given a final chance to reaffirm his guilt. Each refused. And one by one, all 54 were burned alive at the stake. Modern historians almost universally agree that the charges against the Templars were fabricated, a political takedown orchestrated by a deeply indebted king who owed the Templars enormous sums and wanted their wealth. Even Vatican archives, opened in more recent years, revealed that Pope Clement V had actually issued an internal decree in 1308 absolving the Templars of heresy due to lack of evidence, but the weak-willed pontiff was bullied into silence by Philip. The order was officially dissolved in 1312, and on March 18th, 1314, Jacques de Molay was burned at the stake on an island in the Seine River in Paris. According to legend, as the flames consumed him, he cursed both the king and the pope, declaring that they would join him before God within the year. Both men were dead within months. The Templars' real sin was not heresy or idol worship. Their sin was becoming too powerful, too wealthy, and too independent. And the rituals attributed to them, the spitting on crosses, the obscene kisses, the worship of Baphomet, were almost certainly inventions of their persecutors, confessions wrung from men whose feet had been burned to the bone. But the imagery stuck, and the ghost of the Templars would go on to influence secret societies for centuries to come, including the most famous of them all. If there is one secret society whose name has become virtually synonymous with the concept itself, it's the Freemasons. With millions of members worldwide, lodges in nearly every country, and a history stretching back centuries, Freemasonry occupies a peculiar position in the public imagination, simultaneously visible and mysterious, charitable and suspected, mundane and ritualistic, and their initiation ceremonies, while defended by members as deeply symbolic and spiritual, contain elements that have disturbed outsiders for generations. The exact origins of Freemasonry are debated. The most widely accepted theory holds that it evolved from guilds of actual stonemasons who built the great cathedrals and castles of medieval Europe. These skilled craftsmen, particularly those who worked with soft stone and carved elaborate facades, became known as Freestone Masons, or Freemasons for short. Unlike most workers of their era, they weren't tied to the land, and they formed associations to protect their trade secrets and support one another. Over time, the guilds began admitting non-working members, aristocrats and intellectuals drawn to the mystique of the craft, until eventually these speculative masons dominated the lodges, and the actual stonework faded into allegory. Central to Masonic tradition is the allegorical story of Hiram Abiff, the chief architect of King Solomon's temple, who according to legend was murdered by 3 fellow craftsmen after he refused to reveal the master mason's secrets. This narrative forms the backbone of the third degree ritual, the highest of the 3 main degrees of Freemasonry, and it's here that the ceremonies take their most dramatic turn. The first degree, known as entered apprentice, is where it all begins. The candidate arrives at the lodge and is asked to remove all jewelry, money, and metallic objects from his person, entering in what is described as a state of poverty. One shoe is removed. His left trouser leg is rolled up to expose the knee, supposedly to demonstrate that he is free and unshackled. His left breast is bared, historically intended to prove that the initiate is not a woman, though this practice varies by lodge and region. Then comes the blindfold, known in Masonic parlance as the hoodwink, which represents the darkness of ignorance from which the candidate is about to emerge. And finally, a rope with a running noose called the cable toe is placed around his neck, symbolizing the bondage of ignorance and the initiate's willingness to be guided toward the light of knowledge. Blindfolded, partially disrobed, a noose around his neck, and a dagger pressed to his bare chest, the candidate is led through the lodge in what is described as a state of darkness. He is taken before the worshipful master, who stands at the eastern end of the lodge, since light and wisdom are said to come from the east. After a series of ritualistic dialogues, the blindfold is removed, and the initiate sees for the first time the Bible, the square, and the compass laid out before him. He is then presented with a white lambskin apron, the emblem of his new brotherhood. The second degree, the fellowcraft, involves a similar process with additional elements exposed and the symbolism deepened. But the third degree, the Master Mason degree, is where the ceremony reaches its peak of intensity. The lodge is plunged into near total darkness. The candidate, now a fellow craft, is led through a dramatization of the murder of Hiram Abiff, in which he symbolically dies and is reborn. The ritual emphasizes the themes of death, resurrection, loyalty, and the keeping of secrets. It is, by all accounts from those who have experienced it, a deeply emotional and psychologically powerful event. Freemasons insist that their rituals are entirely symbolic, designed to teach moral lessons through allegory. And to be fair, the organization has a long history of charitable work and community service. But the secrecy surrounding these ceremonies, combined with the imagery of nooses, daggers, blindfolds, and symbolic death, has fueled suspicion and fear for centuries. And it's worth noting that many of the world's other secret societies, from the Golden Dawn to the Illuminati themselves, borrowed directly from Masonic ritual and structure. What's particularly fascinating about Masonic ritual is how the ceremonies vary from lodge to lodge and country to country, yet retain a consistent core of symbolism. In some lodges, the third degree ceremony involves the candidate being physically laid on the ground, symbolically dead, before being raised up by the grip of the Master Mason, a handshake that represents his resurrection into the full knowledge and brotherhood of the craft. The psychological impact of this experience, of lying on a cold floor in near total darkness surrounded by chanting men, of being told that you have died and must now be reborn, should not be underestimated. Those who have gone through it often describe it as one of the most intense experiences of their lives. The oaths taken at each degree are another source of controversy. Historically, these oaths included graphic descriptions of the penalties for violating the secrets of the fraternity. The entered apprentice was told that the penalty for revealing Masonic secrets was to have his throat cut across, his tongue torn out by its roots, and his body buried in the sand of the sea at low water mark. The fellow craft was warned of having his heart plucked from his naked left breast. The Master Mason was told that his body would be severed in two, his bowels taken out and burned to ashes, and those ashes scattered to the four winds. Modern Freemasonry has largely moved away from reciting these penalties, replacing them with softer language, but the older rituals remained standard practice for centuries and contributed significantly to the public perception of Freemasonry as a sinister organization. The lodge itself is designed as a symbolic space. The layout represents Solomon's temple with specific stations for each officer. The worshipful master sits in the east, representing the rising sun and the source of light. The senior warden sits in the west, and the junior warden in the south. Every element of the room, from the checkered floor to the two pillars flanking the entrance, carries layers of symbolic meaning that are gradually revealed to the initiate as he progresses through the degrees. The effect is cumulative. By the time a man reaches the third degree, he has been immersed in a world of symbol and allegory so complete that the line between the ritual space and the outside world begins to blur. Speaking of borrowing from older traditions, we need to journey back further still, to the mountains of medieval Persia, where a far deadlier secret society was perfecting the art of ritual indoctrination. The Order of Assassins, or the Nizari Ismailis as they properly called themselves, didn't just have disturbing rituals. They built their entire existence around a system designed to produce men who would kill without question and die without hesitation. The order was founded in 1090 by Hassani Saba, a brilliant and ruthless Ismaili missionary who seized the mountain fortress of Alamut in northern Persia through an ingenious combination of infiltration and timing. From this nearly impregnable castle perched high in the Alborz Mountains, Hassan built a network of strongholds across Persia and Syria, creating a state within a state that would terrify sultans, caliphs, and crusaders alike for nearly 2 centuries. Hassan's power rested on a weapon more terrifying than any army, the fidai, or self-sacrificing agent. These were young men, typically recruited between the ages of 12 and 20, who were trained not merely as warriors, but as instruments of precision killing. The fidai didn't fight in battles. They infiltrated courts, befriended guards, sometimes spending months or even years living among their targets before striking with a single, decisive blow of a dagger, usually in broad daylight, in full view of witnesses, with no attempt to escape. The ritual process by which these young men were transformed into willing instruments of death is the subject of one of history's most famous and disturbing legends. According to the account of Marco Polo, who passed through the region decades after Alamut's fall, Hassan had constructed a secret garden within the walls of his fortress, a paradise of elegant pavilions, flowing streams of wine and honey, and beautiful young women. Young recruits would be drugged with a potion, possibly opium or hashish, and carried unconscious into this garden. When they awoke, they believed they had been transported to the paradise promised by the prophet. After allowing them to indulge for a time, they were drugged again and removed. Upon waking in the harsh reality of the fortress, they were told that only Hassan held the key to returning them to paradise, and the price of that return was absolute obedience. Now, it's important to note that modern scholars have cast serious doubt on this story. Historians like Farhad Daftari and Bernard Lewis have argued that the Paradise Garden legend was largely a creation of hostile Sunni chroniclers and Western crusaders who applied their own fantasies and prejudices to a community they didn't understand. The Nizari fortresses, when examined archaeologically, were Spartan places, not the pleasure palaces of legend. And the name Hashashins, from which we derive the English word assassin, was likely a derogatory term used by enemies rather than a genuine description of drug use. But the psychological reality of the fidai's devotion was not a myth. There is a famous anecdote in which a visiting dignitary was being entertained by a Nizari commander. To demonstrate the loyalty of his followers, the commander gave a signal, and 2 of his fidai immediately leaped from the castle walls to their deaths without a moment's hesitation. Whether the Garden of Paradise existed or not, the Nizari had clearly developed a system of indoctrination so complete that their agents would die on command without flinching. The order's hierarchical structure was itself a kind of ritual machine. Below Hassan, the Grand Headmaster, were the greater propagandists, then the ordinary propagandists, followed by the Rafiqs, or companions, and finally the Lasiks, or adherents, from whose ranks the fidai were drawn. At each level, members were granted access to deeper layers of esoteric Ismaili doctrine, a graduated system of enlightenment that mirrored what other secret societies would adopt centuries later. The idea was that true knowledge was dangerous and could only be revealed to those who had proven their loyalty through progressively more demanding tests. The Order of Assassins survived for nearly 2 centuries before being crushed by the Mongol invasions in the mid-1200s. The fortress of Alamut fell in 1256, and its legendary library, said to contain vast collections of Ismaili texts, was destroyed. But the word they gave to the English language and the psychological template they created for fanatical devotion through ritual indoctrination would echo through history long after their mountain strongholds crumbled to dust. What makes the assassin's story so compelling and so disturbing isn't the legends about hashish gardens and drug-fueled paradises. It's the documented reality of what they achieved through a combination of rigorous training, religious fervor, and a hierarchical system of secrets. Their fidei could spend years living deep undercover, building relationships with their targets, winning the trust of guards and courtiers, all while waiting for the signal that would transform them from a trusted servant into an angel of death. The psychological fortitude required for such operations was extraordinary, and it wasn't achieved through drugs or gardens. It was achieved through a carefully constructed system of belief that told each fidei that his death in service to the order was not an ending, but a beginning, a guaranteed passage to the next world. The assassins also understood the power of spectacle. Their killings were almost always carried out in public, often in crowded marketplaces or during religious ceremonies, and the fidei typically made no attempt to escape. This was deliberate. The message wasn't just that any ruler could be killed. The message was that the assassins were willing to die to deliver that killing, and that no amount of bodyguards, walls, or precautions could stop them. This psychological warfare was arguably more effective than the killings themselves. Rulers across the Muslim world lived in constant fear, and more than a few chose to negotiate with the assassins rather than risk their daggers. From the mountain fortresses of Persia, we now travel across the Atlantic and forward several centuries to the manicured campus of Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, where a very different kind of secret society has been conducting its own disturbing rituals since 1832. The Order of Skull and Bones, also known simply as Bones, is arguably the most powerful secret society in American history, and its initiation ceremonies, which take place inside a windowless, tomb-like building on High Street, have fueled speculation and unease for nearly 200 years. Skull and Bones was founded by William Huntington Russell and Alphonso Taft, the father of future President William Howard Taft, following a dispute among Yale's debating societies. Russell had recently returned from studying in Germany, where he had apparently been exposed to the tradition of German student secret societies known as Burschenschaften, and he returned to New Haven determined to create something similar. The society took the name Skull and Bones, adopted the number 322, which some believe references the death of the Greek orator Demosthenes in 322 BC, and established its headquarters in a building that members and outsiders alike refer to simply as the Tomb. Every year, exactly 15 Yale juniors are selected or tapped to become the next cohort of bonesmen. The tapping process itself is a ritual. Senior members leave the tomb in pairs, walking across campus in dark suits to deliver the news to their chosen successors. But it's what happens after the tapping that has captured the public imagination and disturbed those who've caught glimpses of it. According to a dossier obtained by journalist Ron Rosenbaum and published in Esquire magazine, the Bones initiation ritual from 1940 went like this. The new member was placed in a coffin and carried into the central part of the building. There, he was chanted over by existing members and declared reborn into the society. He was then removed from the coffin and dressed in robes bearing the society's symbols. a bone with his name inscribed on it was tossed into a communal bone heap at the start of every meeting, and initiates were plunged naked into a pile of mud. Other accounts, gathered over decades from former members, whistleblowers, and investigative reporters, paint an even more elaborate picture. According to Alexandra Robbins, who wrote the book Secrets of the Tomb, the initiation features a cast of characters that includes members dressed as the devil, the Pope, and Don Quixote, among other figures. Initiates are reportedly screamed at, insulted, and ordered to crawl around the floor collecting bones, while the assembled bonesmen chant what is known as the death mantra. The words of that mantra have been recorded by observers. The hangman equals death. The devil equals death. Death equals death. In 2001, Rosenbaum managed something no outsider had done before. With the help of a team of Yale students armed with night vision cameras, he recorded a bones initiation ceremony taking place in the tomb's courtyard. The footage, which later aired on ABC News and Fox News, showed figures in cloaks and toga-like costumes acting out what appeared to be a ritual murder scene. A woman held a knife and pretended to slash the throat of another person lying before the initiates. Shrieks and commands filled the night air. The initiates were forced to their knees and ordered to kiss a skull placed at the feet of one of the costumed figures. At one point, a member impersonating then-President George W. Bush shouted crude sexual threats at the new recruits. Former bonesmen have also reported that during the initiation process, each new member must lie naked in a coffin and deliver a complete and detailed account of their sexual history to the assembled brotherhood. This enforced vulnerability, this deliberate stripping away of privacy and dignity, is widely believed to be the mechanism by which Skull and Bones creates the lifelong bonds of loyalty and secrecy that have sustained the society for almost 2 centuries. And then there are the artifacts. The tomb is reportedly filled with human skulls, skeletons, and macabre relics. The most controversial claim involves the skull of the Apache warrior Geronimo, which Prescott Bush, grandfather of George W. Bush, allegedly dug up with a group of fellow bonesmen in 1918 and brought back to the tomb as a trophy. While the claim has never been definitively proven, Geronimo's descendants filed a lawsuit in 2009 attempting to recover the remains, and multiple bonesmen have privately confirmed that a skull referred to as Geronimo sits in a glass case within the building. The list of Skull and Bones alumni reads like a roster of American power. 3 presidents, including both George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, along with William Howard Taft, numerous CIA directors, Supreme Court justices, senators, and captains of industry. The Society's preoccupation with death, coffins, bones, and symbolic rebirth creates a psychological architecture designed to make its members feel that they have died to the outside world and been reborn into something higher, something exclusive, something bound by secrets that must never be shared. What makes Skull and Bones particularly unsettling isn't just the macabre theatrics of its initiation. It's the combination of those rituals with the extraordinary real-world power wielded by its members. This is not a group of college kids playing dress-up in a basement. This is a society whose alumni network has demonstrably shaped American foreign policy, intelligence operations, and financial institutions for nearly 2 centuries. The enforced intimacy of the confessional coffin, the shared experience of humiliation and rebirth, the knowledge that every other member of the Brotherhood holds your deepest secrets, all of these create bonds that outlast college and extend into the corridors of power. Former members who have spoken about their experience, always carefully and usually anonymously, describe the bonds forged in the tomb as unlike anything else in their lives. The society meets twice a week during the members' senior year at Yale for sessions that can last 6 hours or more. During these meetings, in addition to the ritualistic elements, members discuss everything from personal philosophy to career ambitions, forming the kind of deep connections that more casual college friendships rarely achieve. The Society's retreat on Deer Island, a 40-acre private island in the St. Lawrence River, provides a secluded setting where these bonds are further cemented through years of post-graduation gatherings. Some observers have argued that the real ritual of Skull and Bones isn't the coffins and the chanting. The real ritual is the systematic creation of an elite network so tightly bound by shared secrets and mutual obligation that its members will support each other for the rest of their lives. The skulls and bones are props. The real power lies in the relationships they help forge. From the coffins and skulls of Yale, we move to the candlelit chambers of Victorian London, where a very different breed of secret society was pushing the boundaries of occult practice into territory that would shape the modern understanding of magic, ritual, and the dark arts. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded in 1888, was a crucible of esoteric thought that attracted some of the most brilliant and troubled minds of the late 19th century, and its rituals, and the rituals of the organizations it spawned, remain among the most elaborate and disturbing in the history of Western occultism. The Golden Dawn was established by 3 English Freemasons, William Robert Woodman, William Wynne Westcott, and Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers. Westcott, a London coroner with a passion for the arcane, had come into possession of a set of cipher manuscripts written in an old Hermetic code. After decoding them with the help of Mathers, they discovered what they believed to be the outlines of a complete system of magical instruction, a graduated curriculum encompassing Hermetic Kabbalah, astrology, occult tarot, geomancy, and alchemy. From these manuscripts, they built an initiatory order that would synthesize traditions ranging from ancient Egyptian religion to Christian mysticism, from Neoplatonism to ceremonial magic, into a single cohesive system. The Golden Dawn structure was divided into an outer order and an inner order, with members progressing through a series of grades, each marked by increasingly elaborate initiation ceremonies. These rituals were devised largely by Mathers, who possessed a remarkable gift for theatrical ceremony. Members donned elaborate tunics and Egyptian-style headdresses. Altars were erected and consecrated. Incense filled the air. Invocations were chanted to pre-Christian deities, particularly those of the Egyptian pantheon. The rituals were designed not merely to teach, but to transform, to fundamentally alter the consciousness of the participant through a combination of symbolism, drama, and psychological pressure. One member, the eminent theater patron Annie Horniman, was reportedly chained to a cross during her initiation in a kind of symbolic crucifixion. Other ceremonies involved elaborate dramatic productions in which members enacted mythological narratives, dying and being reborn in symbolic reenactments that drew on traditions stretching back thousands of years. The Golden Dawn's membership was remarkable for its era. It included the celebrated poet William Butler Yeats, the actress Florence Farr, the writer Arthur Machen, and Oscar Wilde's wife Constance. But the member who would leave the most lasting and controversial mark was Aleister Crowley, who was initiated into the Outer Order in November 1898, taking the magical name Frater Perdurabo, meaning "Brother, I shall endure to the end." Crowley was brilliant, charismatic, wealthy, and profoundly transgressive. He rapidly advanced through the Golden Dawn's grades, absorbing its teachings on ceremonial magic and the ritual use of drugs, before his combative personality and hunger for power brought him into conflict with the Order's leadership. The resulting schism effectively destroyed the Golden Dawn as a unified organization. What Crowley built from its ashes was something far more extreme. After founding his own magical order, the AA, and becoming head of the Ordo Templi Orientis, the OTO, a fraternity originally founded by German occultist Theodor Reuss, Crowley developed a system of magic that placed sexual ritual at its center. The OTO's highest degrees revolved around what Crowley described as sex magic, the use of sexual energy and the ritualized act of physical union as a means of spiritual transformation and the manifestation of one's will. Crowley's central ritual, the Gnostic Mass, was a ceremonial drama involving a robed priest, a woman who served as the altar, and symbolic enactments of sacred union. The ceremony drew on Catholic liturgical forms, Egyptian mythology, and Crowley's own system of Thelema, the religion he founded around the central principle of "do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." The OTO's ninth degree, its supreme secret, involved the ritualized mixing of male and female sexual essences as a kind of sacramental communion. Crowley wrote extensively on these practices, describing them in coded language that he intended only for initiates, though much of the material was later published and caused considerable scandal. Crowley cultivated his reputation as a provocateur, playing up to the tabloid image of himself as a Satanist, an advocate of human sacrifice, though he was neither. But his rituals were genuinely transgressive for their era, deliberately designed to shatter conventional morality and push participants beyond the boundaries of what respectable Victorian and Edwardian society considered acceptable. The psychological impact of these ceremonies on participants varied enormously, from those who reported profound spiritual experiences to those who emerged traumatized. Crowley himself acknowledged that the magical path was not without its dangers, though he tended to view the casualties as necessary sacrifices on the road to enlightenment. The Golden Dawn's influence on modern occultism cannot be overstated. Its rituals and teachings directly inspired Wicca, modern paganism, and countless other esoteric movements. The system of magic that Mathers, Westcott, and their successors developed remains the foundation upon which most contemporary Western ceremonial magic is practiced. And the shadow of Aleister Crowley, the self-proclaimed wickedest man in the world, still looms over the occult landscape more than 7 decades after his death in 1947. What connects the Golden Dawn and the OTO to the broader story of secret society rituals is their explicit acknowledgement of something that most other organizations on this list deny or downplay. The ritual itself is the point. While the Illuminati framed their ceremonies as tools for political enlightenment, and Skull and Bones wraps its rites in the language of brotherhood and networking, the Golden Dawn and its successors were refreshingly honest about their intentions. They believed genuinely and fervently that the correct performance of ritual could alter consciousness, summon spiritual forces, and transform the practitioner into something more than human. The elaborate ceremonies, the invocations of ancient gods, the symbolic deaths and rebirths were not metaphors or team-building exercises. They were, in the minds of their practitioners, acts of genuine power. And whether you believe in the reality of that power or not, the psychological impact of performing these rituals, of standing in a candlelit chamber surrounded by symbols and incantations, while believing with absolute conviction that you are communing with forces beyond ordinary perception, is undeniable. Every July, in a private 700-acre grove of ancient redwood trees in Sonoma County, California, some of the most powerful men in the world gather for what has been described as both a harmless summer camp and an occult ritual of staggering proportions. This is the Bohemian Grove, the annual retreat of the Bohemian Club, an elite invitation-only gentlemen's club founded in San Francisco in 1872 by a group of writers, artists, and journalists. And the ceremony that opens each year's 2-week encampment, the cremation of care, is one of the most bizarre and unsettling rituals practiced by any modern organization. The Bohemian Club began as a haven for creative types, but over the decades, its membership expanded to include politicians, business titans, and figures of enormous influence. Notable members and guests have included Presidents Nixon and Reagan, Henry Kissinger, Walter Cronkite, and Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, among many others. The club's motto, drawn from Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, is "Weaving spiders come not here," which is supposed to remind members to leave business and politics at the door. Whether they actually do that is a matter of considerable debate. The cremation of care ceremony dates back to 1881, when it was first performed as a simple theatrical exercise during the club's summer outings. Over the years, it has grown into an elaborate production involving a cast of more than 250 participants, including a high priest, torchbearers, acolytes, and various costumed figures. The ceremony takes place on the shore of a small artificial lake beneath the towering canopy of ancient redwoods, and its centerpiece is a 40-foot-tall hollow concrete statue of an owl, which was erected in the late 1920s and has served as the backdrop for the ritual ever since. As darkness falls on the first night of the encampment, the ceremony begins with a procession. A small boat is pulled across the lake, carrying an effigy known as dull care, which represents the worldly worries and moral burdens that the members are symbolically casting off for the duration of their retreat. Dark, hooded figures receive the effigy from the ferryman and place it on an altar at the base of the owl. The high priest then delivers an invocation, calling upon the Owl of Bohemia for counsel and wisdom, while the assembled members, many wearing robes, look on in the flickering light of torches and dramatic pyrotechnics. The ceremony reaches its climax when the effigy of dull care is set ablaze. As the flames consume it, fireworks explode overhead and the music swells. The symbolic meaning, according to the club, is straightforward. The members are banishing the dull cares of conscience, freeing themselves from the weight of responsibility so they can enjoy their retreat in a spirit of carefree fellowship. The word care in this context originally carried the meaning of anxiety or anguish, rather than the more modern connotation of compassion, though critics have pointed out that the distinction is not particularly comforting. For many years, the voice of the owl during the ceremony was provided by a recording of Bohemian Club member Walter Cronkite, the legendary CBS News anchor once described as the most trusted man in America. The irony of America's most trusted voice issuing commands during a ritualistic effigy burning beneath a giant owl in a restricted forest was apparently lost on no one except the participants. In July 2000, the ceremony was secretly filmed for the first time by journalist Alex Jones and his cameraman Mike Hansen, who infiltrated the grove with a hidden camera. The resulting footage, roughly 40 minutes long, captured key elements of the ritual. The robed participants chanting before the owl statue, the procession of the coffin-like effigy, its placement on the pyre, and the ignition of the structure amid dramatic lighting and orchestral accompaniment. The video became the centerpiece of Jones's documentary and brought the cremation of care into the public consciousness in a way that the Bohemian Club had clearly never intended. John Ronson, the British journalist who covered the Grove for a Channel 4 documentary and later wrote about it in his book, Them Adventures with Extremists, offered a somewhat more measured assessment. He described the ceremony as leaving him with an impression of all-pervading immaturity, the pseudo-pagan spooky rituals, the heavy drinking, men who had reached the apex of their professions but emotionally seemed trapped in their college years. Whether the cremation of care is a harmless theatrical tradition or something more sinister depends largely on your perspective. But the image of some of the world's most powerful men gathering in secret to burn an effigy while chanting before a 40-foot owl in the California redwoods is, at the very least, deeply unsettling. And the fact that the ceremony has been performed, in one form or another, for nearly a century and a half suggests that, whatever it means to its participants, they find something of genuine value in the act of symbolically burning their consciences at the start of a 2-week retreat from the real world. Beyond the cremation of care itself, the Bohemian Grove encampment is filled with smaller rituals and traditions that reinforce the atmosphere of secrecy and exclusivity. Members are divided into approximately 120 camps with names like Caveman, Stowaway, Hillbillies, and Mandalay, each with its own traditions and hierarchies. Throughout the 2 weeks, members attend what are known as lakeside talks, private speeches delivered by prominent figures on topics ranging from geopolitics to science, delivered with the understanding that nothing said at the Grove will be reported to the outside world. The combination of extreme secrecy, immense political and financial power, and ritualistic behavior has made the Bohemian Grove a magnet for conspiracy theories. Some of these theories are clearly unfounded, but the legitimate questions remain. What happens when the men who shape public policy and control vast industries gather in total secrecy, explicitly setting aside their cares and conducting ceremonies that, whether symbolic or not, involve the ritualistic rejection of conscience? At minimum, the Grove represents a striking example of how ritual and secrecy can create a sense of solidarity among the powerful, a brotherhood bound by shared experiences that the rest of the world is forbidden to witness or fully understand. The Grove's patron saint, according to club tradition, is John of Nepomuk, a Bohemian priest who, according to legend, was drowned by a king rather than reveal the confessional secrets of the queen. A carved wooden figure of the saint, finger pressed to his lips in the universal gesture of silence, stands on the shore of the Grove's lake, serving as a constant reminder of the sacred duty of secrecy that binds every member. Our final stop on this tour through the rituals of the world's most secretive organizations takes us to Munich, Germany, in the chaotic aftermath of World War I, where a society steeped in occultism and racial pseudoscience was laying the ideological groundwork for one of the darkest chapters in human history. The Thule Society, originally called the Study Group for Germanic Antiquity, was founded in 1918 by Rudolf von Sebetendorf, an adventurer and occultist whose real name was Adam Glauer, the son of a train driver who had invented an aristocratic title for himself during a sojourn in the Ottoman Empire. The Thule Society took its name from the mythical northern island of Thule, which in ancient Greek legend was the most distant land in the north. For the members of the society, Thule represented something far more specific: the supposed ancestral homeland of the Aryan race, a place of pure bloodlines and divine wisdom that had been lost to the corrupting influence of lesser peoples. The Society's ideology was a toxic blend of occultism, Germanic mythology, and virulent anti-Semitism, wrapped in the trappings of mystical ritual. Members gathered in secret, conducting ceremonies that featured occult symbols, candles, ancient runes, and coded language. They believed that by reconnecting with the spiritual traditions of their mythical Aryan ancestors, they could restore Germany to its rightful place of dominance. The Society's emblem incorporated the swastika, chosen for its ancient associations with power and the sun, along with swords and runic symbols. Female psychic mediums reportedly played a role in the Society's rituals, serving as intermediaries who claimed to channel messages from spiritual entities or legendary ancestors. But the Thule Society's significance extends far beyond its occult rituals. Its membership included individuals who would go on to play central roles in the rise of National Socialism. Among those connected to the Society were Rudolf Hess, who became Hitler's deputy, Alfred Rosenberg, the chief ideologist of the Nazi Party, Hans Frank, the future governor-general of occupied Poland, and Dietrich Eckart, a playwright and journalist who served as a mentor to the young Adolf Hitler and reportedly coached him in public speaking. Eckart, who died in December 1923, is said to have declared on his deathbed, "Follow Hitler. He will dance, but it is I who have called the tune. I have initiated him into the secret doctrine, opened his centers in vision, and given him the means to communicate with the powers." It was through the Thule Society that the German Workers' Party, the DAP, was founded in January 1919 by Thule members Karl Harrer and Anton Drexler. Adolf Hitler joined this party in September of that year, and by early 1920, it had been renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the organization that would become the Nazi Party. The Thule Society's newspaper, the Münchener Beobachter, was transformed into the Völkischer Beobachter, which became the primary propaganda organ of the Nazi movement. Now, it's crucial to note that the relationship between the Thule Society and Nazism is more complicated than it might first appear, and historians continue to debate its exact nature. Hitler himself had little patience for occultism and reportedly disdained the mystical preoccupations of some of his followers. After the Nazis came to power in 1933, many esoteric organizations were actually suppressed, and Sebottendorf's attempt to revive the Thule Society was met with hostility from the very regime it had helped birth. His book, claiming credit for paving the way for Hitler, was banned, and he was briefly imprisoned before going into exile. But while Hitler may have dismissed the occult in private, other Nazi leaders, particularly Heinrich Himmler, embraced it fully. Himmler modeled the SS on the structure of the Jesuit order and infused it with pseudo-mystical rituals drawn from Germanic paganism. The SS used the Nazis' grandiose public spectacles, torchlit processions, and elaborate ceremonies to invoke a sense of mysticism and connect the political agenda with a larger, almost divine mission. The Death's Head rings designed for SS officers incorporated runic symbols that traced directly back to the occult traditions the Thule Society had championed. The Thule Society stands as perhaps the most disturbing example of what can happen when the rituals and beliefs of a secret society spill out of their ceremonial chambers and into the real world. Other societies on this list have been accused of bizarre practices, symbolic violence, and psychological manipulation. The Thule Society helped create the ideological framework for actual violence on a scale that defies comprehension. Its occult rituals, its mythology of racial purity, and its belief in a divinely ordained Aryan destiny didn't just stay within the walls of its meeting rooms. They seeped into the consciousness of a generation and helped fuel a regime that would murder millions. What's particularly haunting about the Thule Society is how quickly its ideas metastasized from the eccentric beliefs of a small group of occultists into a mass movement that consumed an entire nation. The society itself never had more than a few thousand members at its peak, and historians continue to debate whether its actual membership was even that high. But ideas, particularly dangerous ones, wrapped in the seductive language of destiny and racial superiority, don't need large numbers to spread. They just need the right conditions, and post-World War I Germany, humiliated by defeat, ravaged by economic collapse, and desperate for someone to blame, provided exactly those conditions. The society's rituals, with their emphasis on ancient runes, mythical homelands, and the mystical power of Aryan blood, provided a pseudo-spiritual framework that made the Nazi ideology feel like something more than mere politics. It felt like destiny. It felt like a sacred mission, and that feeling, that sense of participating in something transcendent and divinely ordained, is exactly what makes the rituals of secret societies so powerful and, in cases like this, so catastrophically dangerous. It's worth noting that serious historians are careful to distinguish between the documented facts about the Thule Society and the vast mythology that has grown up around it in the decades since. Many claims about Nazi occultism are exaggerated, fabricated, or based on unreliable sources. The historian Nicholas Goodrick Clark, in his influential work The Occult Roots of Nazism, traced much of the popular fascination with Nazi occultism back to sensationalist books of the 1960s and 1970s that relied more on speculation than evidence. But the core connection, the fact that key figures in the early Nazi movement were associated with the Thule Society, and that the society's ideology of Aryan supremacy and mystical nationalism directly fed into Nazi doctrine, is well established by the historical record. And that, perhaps, is the most unsettling lesson that runs through all of these stories. Secret societies and their rituals are not just curiosities from the dusty pages of history books. They are living systems of belief and belonging, capable of inspiring both profound devotion and terrible acts. From the torchlit forests of Bavaria to the windowless tomb on a New England campus, from the mountain fortresses of medieval Persia to the redwood groves of Northern California, these organizations have understood something fundamental about human psychology, that rituals create bonds, secrets create loyalty, and the combination of the two can make people do things they would never do alone. If you found this journey through the world's most disturbing secret society rituals as fascinating as I did, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know, and it ensures you won't miss the next time we dive into the unexplained. Until then, sleep well, and try not to think too much about what might be happening behind the doors you can't see.